The fluorescent lights of Fresh Bite buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the stainless steel counters and bright green menu boards. It was just past 7 p.m., and the dinner rush hadn't let up. Orders stacked up on the screen like falling dominoes, each beep from the kitchen printer sharper than the last. In the middle of it all stood Mateo, 16 years old, sleeves rolled up past his elbows, sweat beating at his temples despite the restaurant's aggressive air conditioning. He'd been on his feet since 3 p.m., and that was after a full school day, a grueling soccer practice and a quick peanut butter sandwich eaten in the parking lot. His shift wasn't supposed to end until 10, but the schedule had changed again without warning. Now he was stuck covering for 2 people who'd called out last minute. Again. Mateo wasn't lazy. He showed up early, never complained about mopping floors or scrubbing fryers, and always double-checked orders before handing them over. He needed this job not for spending money, but because every dollar went into a worn-out shoebox under his bed labeled college. His mom worked double shifts at the hospital, and his little sister had started asking why they couldn't afford new shoes anymore. So Mateo said yes to every extra hour, even when his body screamed no. Tonight, though, something inside him had reached its limit. The store manager, a wiry guy named Darren with a permanent frown and a Bluetooth earpiece that never left his ear, clapped his hands together near the drink station. "All right, team huddle, quick one," he announced, voice tight with forced cheer. The crew shuffled over, 2 high schoolers still in their uniforms, a college student balancing textbooks under one arm, and Mateo wiping his hands on his apron. They formed a loose semicircle, eyes tired but alert. Huddles usually meant either good news, free shift meals, or bad news, schedule changes. No one expected anything in between. "Big news," Darren began, puffing his chest slightly. "Corporate's rolling out a new mystery diner program. Starting tonight, one of our locations will get a surprise visit from a secret evaluator. If we score high, we get bonuses. If we score low..." He let the sentence hang, eyebrows raised meaningfully. "So stay sharp, smile, and for the love of fries, don't let anyone see you on your phone." A few groans were quickly swallowed. Bonuses sounded nice, but everyone knew how these things worked. The evaluator would show up during the busiest hour, order something complicated, and judge them on things like how many times they said, "Have a great day." Not whether they'd been working 12 hours straight. Mateo stayed quiet, arms crossed. He'd heard it all before. Fresh Bite's slogan was, "Fresh food, fresh start," and their posters around the break room showed smiling teens in crisp uniforms holding diplomas, with captions like, "Your future begins here." But in reality, here often meant skipping meals to afford bus fare or choosing between homework and overtime. Just then, the kitchen printer shrieked again. 3 more orders. The college student sighed and jogged back to the grill. Mateo turned to follow, but Darren stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, you're on register for the next 2 hours. We're short-staffed again, so no breaks until 9. Mateo blinked. "But I already worked 6 hours today, and I've got a chem test tomorrow morning." Darren's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I know, man, but corporate's watching. We gotta look strong. Besides," he added, lowering his voice, "you're one of our best. If anyone can handle it, it's you." The words were meant to flatter, but they landed like a weight. Mateo nodded slowly, throat tight. He walked back to the register, fingers stiff as he logged in. Through the front window, he saw a man in a faded baseball cap and wrinkled jacket take a seat in the far corner booth. He looked tired, like someone who'd been traveling all day, probably just another customer waiting out the rain. But something about the way the man watched the staff, quiet, observant, not glued to his phone, made Mateo uneasy. The next hour blurred into a cycle of scanning items, bagging meals and forcing a smile. His feet throbbed, his eyes burned. At one point, he dropped a cup of ice and had to bend down to pick it up, his back protesting like it belonged to someone twice his age. When he stood, he caught the man in the booth watching him, not with judgment, but with something closer to concern. Then came the breaking point. A new order flashed. Double Southwest bowl, no rice, extra black beans, light dressing on the side, and a kid's smoothie, but make it mango, not strawberry. Mateo typed it in, but the system glitched. He had to re-enter it twice. By the time the kitchen finally called it ready, the customer, a woman with a stroller and 2 impatient toddlers, was tapping her foot. "Seriously? It's just a bowl," she huffed, snatching the bag without a thank you. Mateo stood there, hands gripping the counter edge. His heart pounded, not from anger, but from a deep, aching exhaustion that had been building for months. Darren appeared beside him, voice low. "Keep it together. Mystery Diner's still here." That did it, without thinking. Mateo turned toward the group, crew, manager, even the man in the corner, and said, voice quiet but clear, "If this is how we're treated, I don't see how anyone can call this employee first." The words hung in the air like smoke. The college student froze mid-wipe. One of the younger cashiers dropped a straw wrapper. Even Darren looked stunned, mouth half open. Then silence, thick, heavy, and sudden. Mateo immediately regretted it. His face burned. He expected yelling, maybe even a suspension. He braced himself, eyes fixed on the floor, but no one spoke. From the corner booth, the man in the baseball cap slowly closed his notebook. He didn't look angry. If anything, he looked thoughtful, like he'd just heard something he hadn't expected, but needed to hear. Mateo didn't know it yet, but that single sentence, spoken not in defiance, but in honest weariness, had just changed everything. Not just for him, but for hundreds of kids just like him working behind counters in kitchens and on late-night shifts across the country. All he knew right then was that his shift wasn't over. His feet hurt, and he still had 2 hours to go before he could collapse into bed, hoping tomorrow would be different. It wouldn't be. But soon, sooner than anyone imagined, it would be. Mateo didn't sleep much that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Darren's shocked face, heard the silence that followed his outburst, felt the heat crawling up his neck like a warning. He tossed and turned on his thin mattress, the streetlight outside casting long shadows across his bedroom wall. His little sister was already asleep in the next room, her breathing soft and steady, a sound that usually calmed him. Not tonight. By 5 a.m., he gave up. He sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing his temples, wondering if he'd just thrown away his job, and with it his shot at saving enough for community college. Freshbite wasn't perfect, but it paid on time, and they'd never cut his hours without warning, until recently. Still, saying what he did in front of everyone, in front of a mystery diner, that wasn't just risky, it was reckless. He dragged himself to school on autopilot. He barely heard his teachers, barely registered the soccer coach yelling drills during lunch break. His mind kept circling back to that booth in the corner, the man in the baseball cap who hadn't looked away when Mateo spoke. There'd been something in his eyes, not anger, not amusement, just attention, like he'd been listening not to the words, but to everything behind them. Meanwhile, across town, in a quiet office on the top floor of a glass building that overlooked the river, Elias Thorne sat alone in the dark. The city lights shimmered below, but he wasn't looking at them. He was watching a grainy security feed on his laptop, rewinding, pausing, playing again. It was footage from Freshbite store number 47, the same store where, just hours earlier, he'd sat unnoticed, sipping iced tea and scribbling notes in a worn leather journal. Elias hadn't planned to visit that location. He'd been drifting from store to store for weeks, slipping in during off hours, ordering the cheapest meal, watching how people moved, how they spoke to each other, how they held themselves when they thought no one important was watching. He'd started Freshbite 15 years ago in a food truck with a borrowed generator and a dream of giving young workers a real shot. Back then, he knew every employee by name. Now he barely recognized his own company. Investors kept pushing for higher margins. Trim labor, they said. Optimize scheduling. Reduce idle time. The language was clean, clinical, but the result was kids like Mateo working themselves to the bone while corporate celebrated efficiency gains. But Mateo had cracked something open. Elias replayed the moment again. Not the complaint itself, though that had startled him, but what came before and after. He saw Mateo stay late to show a new hire how to calibrate the drink machine. He saw him give his last protein bar to a coworker who'd missed lunch. He saw him pull out a crumpled worksheet during his 10-minute break and try to solve equations under the dim light of the break room fridge. This wasn't a kid looking for an easy way out. This was someone trying to do right by everyone, his family, his team, his future, while being asked to do more with less, again and again. Elias leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. He hadn't felt this unsettled in years. Not since the day he signed off on the new scheduling algorithm that automatically cut hours for anyone under 18 to avoid overtime triggers. At the time, it seemed smart. Now watching Mateo blink back exhaustion while bagging someone's avocado toast, it felt like betrayal. He picked up his phone and dialed security. Pull all footage from store number 47 last night. Everything. And get me Mateo Rivera's file, full employment history, schedule logs, performance reviews, quietly. No one else sees this. Back at school, Mateo's day dragged. He jumped every time his phone buzzed, half expecting a call from Darren saying he was fired. But the notifications were just group chats and a reminder about his chem test. By the time the final bell rang, his nerves had settled into a dull ache of dread. He walked to Fresh Bite, not because he wanted to, but because he needed the hours. If he was going to be let go, he'd rather hear it in person than through a text. The restaurant was quieter than usual. Darren wasn't at the front desk. Instead, a substitute manager, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Lena, gave him a small nod. "You're on prep today. Cooler's backed up." Mateo nodded, relieved she wasn't acting strange. Maybe the mystery diner hadn't reported him. Maybe the whole thing had blown over. What he didn't know was that Elias had already made a decision. That evening, after closing, Elias drove back to the same store. He parked down the street, watching as the crew filed out one by one, laughing, complaining, texting. Mateo was last, shoulders slumped, hoodie pulled low. He walked to the bus stop 3 blocks away, head down, earbuds in. Elias didn't follow. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough. Back at headquarters the next morning, he called an emergency meeting with HR and operations, but not the usual executives. He brought in the head of training, the lead scheduler, and 2 regional managers who still visited stores regularly. On the conference table, he placed a single printed photo. A still from the security footage showing Mateo helping a customer whose card declined, quietly covering the $3.50 difference from his own tip jar. "Who is this?" Elias asked. No one answered at first. "This," he said, tapping the photo, "is what we've lost." He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply laid out what he'd witnessed: the double shifts, the skipped breaks, the pressure to perform while being treated as disposable. Then he asked a question that silenced the room. When did we decide that employee first only applied to employees who didn't need sleep? The team shifted uncomfortably. Someone mumbled about market realities. Another mentioned competitive labor costs. Elias shook his head. "I don't care about the spreadsheets right now. I care about the kid who's choosing between studying and staying awake on the bus home, because we won't give him a predictable schedule." He paused, then added, "And I'm going to talk to him myself." That afternoon, an email landed in Mateo's inbox. It looked official, corporate logo, clean formatting, but the message was short and oddly personal. "Hi, Mateo. We'd like to invite you to our downtown office for a brief conversation about your recent feedback. Your perspective matters to us. Please come by tomorrow at 4 p.m., room 302. No need to bring anything, just yourself. Fresh Bite Leadership." Mateo read it 3 times. His stomach twisted. Was this a trap? A polite way to fire him in person? Or worse, some kind of legal thing? He showed it to his mom over dinner. She frowned, stirring a pot of beans on the stove. "They could have called. Or talked to you at work. Why bring you all the way downtown?" "I don't know," Mateo admitted. "But if I don't go, I'll always wonder." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then go, but keep your phone charged. And text me the second you walk in." The next day, Mateo took the bus downtown, heart pounding the whole way. The Fresh Bite headquarters was sleek and modern, all glass and plants and people in blazers walking fast. He felt out of place in his jeans and scuffed sneakers, clutching the strap of his backpack like a lifeline. At the front desk, he gave his name. The receptionist smiled. "Ah, yes. He's been waiting for you." "He?" Mateo asked. She pointed down the hall. "Room 302, go on in." He walked slowly, rehearsing what he'd say if they accused him of disrespect or insubordination. But when he opened the door, there was no panel of executives. Just one man, sitting alone at a small table, no tie, sleeves rolled up, a half-empty coffee cup in front of him. It was the man from the booth. The man looked up, stood, and extended his hand. Mateo? I'm Elias. Thanks for coming. Mateo froze. Elias, as in the Elias, founder, CEO, the guy whose face was on the Our Story page of the Fresh Bite website. You were there? Mateo stammered. Elias nodded. I was, and I heard what you said. And I want you to know, I'm glad you said it. Mateo didn't know what to feel. Relief, confusion, suspicion? Elias gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Please, I don't have all the answers, but I'd like to listen. Really listen. Because I think you might know something the rest of us forgot. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, for the first time in a long time, someone in charge was finally paying attention. Mateo sat down slowly, like the chair might vanish if he moved too fast. The room was nothing like he expected. No giant desk, no wall of awards, no fancy leather chairs. Just two folding chairs, a small table with a water pitcher, and a window that looked out over the city skyline. Elias sat back down too, not behind the table but across from him, like they were just two people having coffee at a diner. I know this is weird, Elias said, voice low and steady. You probably think I'm here to chew you out or offer some corporate apology that doesn't mean anything. Mateo swallowed. Honestly? Yeah. Elias gave a small, tired smile. Fair enough. But I'm not here to fix you. I'm here because I think you might help me fix something I broke. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. When I started Fresh Bite, I was about your age, working nights at a gas station, trying to save for trade school. I saw how people got treated like machines. Show up, work fast, don't talk back. I swore if I ever ran something, it'd be different. People would be seen, respected, especially the young ones just starting out. He paused, looking out the window for a second. Somewhere along the way, I stopped listening. I got caught up in numbers, meetings, growth targets, and I let systems take over what should have stayed human. Mateo didn't say anything at first. He'd heard speeches like this before, from teachers, coaches, even politicians on the news. Big promises, no follow-through. But there was something in Elias's voice that felt real, not polished, not rehearsed. Just tired and maybe a little ashamed, so why me? Mateo finally asked. There are hundreds of kids working your stores. I just snapped. You didn't snap, Elias said gently. You spoke up. There's a difference. Most people stay quiet because they're scared of losing hours, of being labeled difficult, of not getting references for college. You said what needed saying even when it cost you. Mateo looked down at his hands. They were still rough from scrubbing trays and handling hot pans. I didn't do it to be brave. I was just done. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. That's the thing, Elias said. Pretending isn't leadership. It's hiding. And I've been hiding behind reports and dashboards, while real people like you are burning out. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook, the same one Mateo had seen him writing in at the restaurant. He flipped it open to a page filled with messy handwriting. I've been visiting stores for weeks, watching, listening, but no one talks honestly when they think the boss might be watching. Until you. He turned the notebook around and slid it across the table. On the page was a single underlined sentence. If this is how we're treated, I don't see how anyone can call this employee first. Mateo's throat tightened. Now, Elias said, closing the notebook. I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer like no one's listening, because for once someone actually is. He leaned in slightly. If you could change one thing about how Fresh Bite treats its youngest workers, just one thing, what would it be? The question hung in the air. Mateo thought about it. Not the flashy stuff. Free food, branded hoodies, pizza parties. Those were nice, but they didn't fix the real problem. He took a breath. I'd want schedules that make sense, he said. Not just whatever's left over after the adults pick theirs. If I'm in school, don't give me a shift that starts at 5 a.m. the day after finals. If I say I can only work 20 hours, honor that. Don't guilt me into taking more because the team needs you. And give us real breaks. Not 10 minutes to scarf down a cold burrito while standing up. He paused, then added, and stop acting like we're replaceable. We're not just warm bodies to fill a shift. We've got dreams too. Elias didn't interrupt. He just listened, nodding slowly, eyes never leaving Mateo's face. When Mateo finished, Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, what if I told you I could make all of that happen? Mateo blinked. You could? I can't promise it'll be perfect overnight, Elias said, but I can promise it'll start. With you. He explained his idea. A youth advisory council made up entirely of frontline workers under 18. They'd meet monthly with leadership, review scheduling policies, suggest changes to training, even help design new uniforms that didn't fall apart after 2 washes. Mateo would be the first chair, not because he was special, but because he'd already shown the courage to speak truth. And your hours? Elias added. We'll cap them at 20 during school weeks. No exceptions. You'll still get paid fairly, and we'll guarantee those hours so you can actually plan your life. Mateo felt a lump in his chest. It sounded too good to be true. Why trust me with that? Because you care enough to be honest, Elias said simply. That's rare. And valuable. They talked for nearly 2 hours. About school, about Mateo's mom working nights, about how hard it was to focus in class when you're exhausted from work. Elias didn't offer empty praise or handouts. He asked questions. He took notes. At one point, he even admitted he hadn't eaten lunch and offered to order something from the cafeteria. Mateo, half joking, said, "As long as it's not another Southwest bowl." Elias laughed, a real unguarded laugh, and said, "Noted." When it was time to go, Elias walked him to the elevator. "This isn't a one-time thing," he said. "I'll be in touch. And if anyone at your store gives you trouble, even Darren, you call me directly. My number's going in your phone before you leave." Sure enough, before Mateo stepped into the elevator, Elias pulled out his own phone, typed in his number, and sent a test text. "This is Elias, don't lose this." Mateo stared at the message, still not quite believing it. As the elevator doors closed, he felt something he hadn't in months, hope. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet, steady kind that comes when someone finally sees you. The next day at school, he told no one. Not even his best friend. It felt too fragile. Like if he said it out loud, it might disappear. But that afternoon, when he walked into Freshbite for his shift, something was different. Darren didn't glare at him. Didn't avoid him. Instead, he handed him a printed schedule. Clean, clear, with exactly 20 hours marked for the week, all after 3 p.m. "New policy," Darren muttered, not meeting his eyes. "Corporate says student hours get priority now." Mateo didn't ask questions. He just nodded and got to work. Later that week, an official email arrived. "Congratulations. You've been selected as the inaugural Youth Voice representative for Freshbite." He read it 3 times. Then he showed it to his mom. She didn't cry, but her eyes got shiny and she hugged him longer than usual. "I always knew you had good in you," she whispered. "Now the world gets to see it too." Mateo didn't feel like a hero. He still had homework, still had to mop floors, still worried about money. But for the first time, he didn't feel alone in it, and somewhere downtown a CEO sat at his desk, staring at a blank policy draft titled Respectful Scheduling Guidelines, with a single note at the top in his own handwriting. Start with Mateo's words. Change doesn't always come with sirens and headlines. Sometimes it starts with one tired kid saying what everyone else is too afraid to, and one leader finally listening. At first, no one believed it. When the new scheduling policy rolled out across Freshbite stores, most crew members just stared at the updated shift boards like they were written in another language. 20 guaranteed hours for students. No shifts before 7 a.m. on school days. Mandatory 15-minute breaks even during rushes. And a new rule. No one under 18 could be scheduled for closing and opening back-to-back. One veteran crew member at Mateo's store snorted. "Yeah, right. They'll forget about this by next month." Even Mateo wasn't sure it would last. He kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for corporate to realize how much it cost and quietly reverse everything. But weeks passed and the changes stuck. Paychecks reflected the new hours. Managers stopped pressuring teens to volunteer for extra shifts. And when a new hire asked if they really got a full break, Darren, of all people, just pointed to the clock and said, "Go, you've earned it." The real test came when the first Youth Voice Council meeting happened. Mateo sat at a long table in the same downtown conference room, but this time he wasn't alone. Around him were 6 other teens from different cities, some still in high school, one in trade school, all working frontline shifts. They'd never met before, but they shared the same tired eyes and the same quiet determination. Elias didn't run the meeting like a boss. He sat at the end of the table with a notepad, letting them talk first. And talk they did, about uniforms that ripped at the seams, about training videos that felt like punishment, about how hard it was to ask for time off for college interviews without sounding ungrateful. Mateo listened more than he spoke at first. But when someone mentioned how managers would ignore requests for schedule changes unless you knew someone, he leaned in. What if we had a simple online form? Not some corporate portal with 10 steps, just a clear way to say, I need this day off for my sister's graduation, and get a real answer in 48 hours? Elias didn't say, we'll look into it. He turned to his assistant and said, build that. Launch it in 2 weeks. Test it with this group first. That's when Mateo realized this wasn't just talk. It was action. Word started spreading, not through press releases, but through group chats, locker room whispers, and late-night texts between crew members. Did you hear? Freshbite actually listens now. At first it was skepticism, then curiosity, then cautious hope, but not everyone was happy. Some store managers grumbled about losing control. A few even tried to bend the new rules, scheduling teens for just 1 extra hour or skipping breaks. Because it's slow, but then something unexpected happened. The crew started holding each other accountable. When a manager tried to guilt a new kid into staying late, 2 older workers stepped in. That's not how it works anymore, one said calmly. Check the policy. And the policy was everywhere, printed in break rooms, pinned in staff apps, even read aloud during onboarding. It wasn't hidden in fine print. It was front and center, like a promise. Then came the local news story. A reporter had heard rumors about the teen who changed a company and reached out to Mateo. He almost said no. He didn't want to be a poster boy, didn't want attention, but Elias encouraged him. Tell your truth. Not for fame, for the kids who still feel invisible. So Mateo agreed, but only if the story focused on the team, not just him. The resulting piece was short, quiet, and powerful. No dramatic music, no slow-motion shots, just footage of teens clocking in, studying during breaks, laughing during cleanup, and a 30-second clip of Mateo saying, I didn't ask for a spotlight. I just asked to be treated like a person. The video got shared more than anyone expected, not because it was flashy, but because it felt real. Parents commented, this is what my kid deals with. Teachers wrote, we see this exhaustion every day. Even other fast food workers from different chains messaged, Mateo, how do we get this where we work? Freshbite's social media team didn't hype it. They just posted the article with a simple caption, listening starts with hearing. Inside the company, momentum built. The Youth Voice Council grew from 7 members to 20, with rotating seats so more teens could participate. They helped redesign the onboarding process, replacing boring lectures with real scenarios like, what do you do if a customer yells at you? Or how do you ask for help when you're overwhelmed? They also pushed for something small but huge, name tags that included pronouns. Not because it was trendy, but because one non-binary member said, every time someone misgenders me, it chips away at my sense of belonging. Elias approved it the same day. Back at his home store, Mateo noticed the shift in the air. New hires weren't just handed an apron and told to figure it out. They got a buddy. Crew meetings included time for people to share wins, not just complaints. And when Mateo had to miss a shift for a college tour, his schedule was adjusted without a single guilt trip. One evening, as he was wiping down the drink station, the college student who'd been working with him since last year stopped beside him. You know, she said quietly, before all this, I was about to quit. I was working 35 hours a week and failing 2 classes. Now I'm back on track. And I actually like coming here. Mateo just nodded. That was better than any headline. But the biggest moment came during a surprise visit from Elias. He didn't come in disguise this time. He walked in during a busy Friday dinner rush, rolled up his sleeves, and asked, what can I do to help? The crew froze for a second, then someone handed him a mop. Someone else showed him how to refill the napkin dispensers. For 2 hours, the CEO of a national chain cleaned floors, restocked cups, and took out the trash, side by side with the people who did it every day. No cameras. No announcement. Just work. Afterward, as he was leaving, Elias pulled Mateo aside. You've changed more than policies, he said. You've changed the culture, and that's the hardest thing to fix. Mateo looked around. at the crew laughing over a shared bag of chips during break, at the new schedule board with clear, fair shifts, at the youth voice suggestion box now bolted to the wall. He didn't feel proud. He felt grateful, because this wasn't his victory. It was theirs. All of them. The tired, the overlooked, the ones who kept showing up even when it hurt. And for the first time in a long time, showing up didn't feel like a burden. It felt like belonging. The changes weren't perfect. There were still bad days, still glitches, still moments of frustration. But now there was also a path forward and a voice that mattered. That was enough. The Fresh Bite annual town hall wasn't usually something anyone looked forward to. In past years, it had been a long slideshow of sales numbers, growth charts, and pep talks from executives no one had ever met. Employees watched from folding chairs, checking their phones, counting the minutes until they could go back to their real jobs. But this year was different. For one thing, the room was packed, not just with managers and regional leads, but with crew members from dozens of stores. Teens in fresh uniforms sat beside veteran grill cooks. Dishwashers shared rows with shift supervisors. Even a few parents were there, invited by their kids who'd been part of the Youth Voice Council. And for the first time ever, the stage didn't belong to corporate. Elias stood at the mic for only 10 minutes. He didn't talk about profits or expansion. He talked about people. "A year ago," he said, voice steady, "I sat in one of our stores and heard something I'd stopped listening for. Honesty. Since then, we've learned that real change doesn't come from the top down. It comes from the ground up, from the people who live the work every day." Then he stepped aside. The spotlight shifted to the edge of the stage, where Mateo stood, hands tucked in his pockets, heart hammering.
He hadn't wanted to speak.
He'd told Elias as much. "I'm not a speaker," he'd said. "I just said what I felt." "But that's exactly why you should," Elias replied. "Because it wasn't a speech. It was truth." Now, under the bright lights, Mateo took a breath and walked to the center of the stage. He didn't have notes. Didn't need them. He looked out at the crowd, not at the suits, but at the faces he recognized. The girl who'd cried in the walk-in freezer last year because she couldn't afford her asthma inhaler. The guy who'd missed his prom because he was covering a double shift. The new kid who'd just joined the council last month and still looked nervous talking in meetings. "I didn't come here to give a big speech," Mateo began, voice quiet but clear. "I came because I owe you all something. Honesty." He paused, then continued. "A year ago I was tired. Not just need a nap tired. The kind of tired that makes you forget why you're doing any of it. I was working so much I fell asleep in class. I skipped meals so I could save bus fare. And every time I asked for help I was told, 'This is how it is. If you don't like it, quit.'" He looked down for a second, then back up. But quitting wasn't an option. Because this job wasn't just about me. It was about my mom working nights so I could stay in school. It was about my little sister needing new shoes. It was about saving every dollar I could for a future I wasn't sure I'd reach. A few people in the front row nodded. Some had tears in their eyes. So when I said what I said that night, Mateo went on, I wasn't trying to be brave. I was just done pretending. I didn't want to be a hero. I just wanted to make it through the week without falling asleep on the bus home. He took another breath. What happened after that surprised me more than anyone. Because instead of punishing me, someone listened. And not just listened, acted. And then more people spoke up. And more changes came. Not because one person fixed everything, but because we all decided we deserved better. He looked toward the back of the room, where Elias stood near the exit, arms crossed, watching quietly. "Leadership isn't about having all the answers," Mateo said. "It's about having the courage to ask the right questions, and then really listening to the answers even when they're hard to hear." He didn't wrap up with a grand promise or a catchy slogan. He just said, "So thank you for speaking up, for showing up, for not giving up on each other. This isn't my story. It's ours." Then he stepped back. For a second there was silence. Then the room erupted. Not just applause, but cheers, whistles, stomping feet. People stood up not because they were told to, but because they felt seen. A group of teens from 3 different states hugged each other like they'd known each other forever. An older cook wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and gave Mateo a thumbs up. Elias didn't return to the stage. He stayed in the back watching it all unfold. In that moment, he didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a witness to something far more important. A community rebuilding itself, one honest conversation at a time. After the event, Matteo didn't stick around for photos or interviews. He slipped out the side door and walked to the bus stop just like he always did. But this time, his steps felt lighter. Over the next few months, the ripple effects kept spreading. Other companies, some in food service, some in retail, reached out to Freshbite, not to copy their menu, but to learn how they'd rebuilt trust with young workers. Elias always gave the same answer: start by listening, not to data, to people. Matteo finished his senior year with decent grades, enough savings for his first semester of community college, and a recommendation letter from Elias that simply read, "This young person taught me more about leadership than any MBA ever could." He didn't stay on the Youth Voice Council forever. He passed the role to someone else, a quiet girl from a rural store who'd written a powerful suggestion about mental health resources for frontline workers. That was the point, after all, not to create a single hero, but to build a system where anyone could be heard. Years later, when people asked Matteo about that night, the night he spoke up in front of the hidden CEO, he never made it sound dramatic. "It wasn't about me," he'd say. "It was about finally saying out loud what so many of us were feeling but too scared to admit." And that, more than anything, was the real victory. Because change doesn't always start with a protest or a headline. Sometimes it starts with a tired kid standing behind a counter saying, "This isn't right." And someone in power finally having the humility to say, "You're right, let's fix it." In the end, the story wasn't about a CEO or a teen. It was about what happens when we stop treating people like cogs in a machine and start seeing them as human beings with dreams, limits, and dignity. And that's a story worth telling, not for clicks or views, but because it reminds us that even the smallest voice, when heard with respect, can move mountains. As Matteo boarded the bus that evening, he pulled out his phone and texted his mom. "Town hall's over. I think we did something good." She replied instantly, "I knew you would." He smiled, leaned his head against the window and closed his eyes. Not from exhaustion this time, but from peace. The bus rolled forward, carrying him home, carrying hope, carrying the quiet truth that real change begins not with power, but with courage and the willingness to listen.